All right. So, in the previous video, I asked you guys to challenge me because it's not the definition of reality. Its definition is reality. And I feel, or I understand, or I think, or I consider, or I processed any way that could come out. That ultimately, however we define things, is how reality turns out to be. And that's kind of like the gist of like think positively and positivity. Like, I think positivity is a toxic trait, by the way. I think neutrality is love. I do. Anyways, today's video is the loudest thing you're arguing is probably the furthest thing emotionally from your context. Writing about owners of the entity. Ooh. All right, so I was doing some research. I'm always in research mode. So the reason why I started this video is because I want to have conversations and nobody's there to listen to me, or at the very least, I want to think out loud. So my babies, writing about owners of the entities. Part of the things I got inspired with are the people that are, I mean, look at our society. With all this technology that we're having, and all this growth and all this kind of stuff that we're having, the small business owner still struggles. Let's just say 90% of them still struggle. Granted, technology is made for them, but technology doesn't really understand them. It's always like the technologies that are there, or at the very least, the people that are capitalizing on technologies, are the people who, regardless, would never be small business owners. Why do I say that? I think a small business owner is a mindset. And hear me out, dude. Not everybody wants to work like an asshole. A lot of people just want to succeed in a way that they can live a peaceful life. A lot. Now, true, a lot of people want money, but I'm 39 years old. I've seen people work hard to make some money and then not work at all for like 3, 4 months. I've seen people work hard to make a lot of money and stop working at all until that money is gone and then go back to it. Yet I've seen people that could have worked a bit harder for a bit more money, but they refused to because their time was more valuable somewhere else. And that's what I mean by small business owners, a mindset. I'm not disrespecting anyone. Again, I'm a big believer that anyone could do whatever the fuck they want. If you're gonna be an asshole and that's what you want, you can be an asshole. But then I could be whatever I want if I want to retaliate or whatever it is. Not I, not me, Tari, not whatever this is. People can actually choose to do what they want, even if they don't really like you, they get to choose that as well. So that's why I think like ultimately when it comes to everyone can do whatever they want, it balances itself out. Free market will always reign supreme, simply because it always balances itself out a lot faster than when people kind of like interfere and try to create it. But hey, man, we're not going to be discussing that. But we are going to be basically talking about writing about owners of the entities and the emotions behind how they struggle with work because of the research that I've been doing. And what is the work of an owner? I was an owner at one point. I was an owner of many entities at one point, but a restaurant specifically twice, 3 times. Two restaurants and one coffee shop, and a catering company. But like, I don't know if I want to kind of discuss that because the catering company was contractual. It wasn't daily, so the stress of it was not really. I actually had spaces to kind of like find out what I could do to get more contracts. But anyway, so one of the beautiful things about being an owner is the personalization of your work. And that's amazing when it's appreciated or when you do something worth appreciation. That's key. Because you always want to be appreciated, but some of the times you just let's just say too relaxed, maybe unprofessional even, or sometimes just a total douchebag. You didn't deserve it, or you fucked up, right? The loudest thing you're arguing is probably the furthest thing emotionally from your context. And the idea behind it is most of the people that I talked to reminded me a lot of when I was an emotional individual that was, that basically would, anytime I get emotional, it's no longer about the topic that was there, it was happening. Because when you're emotional and you start basically wanting people to hear you, you're going to move on a tangent and connect things awkwardly until you finally get to a point where you're expressing truly what's bothering you out loud. And and I feel like I was actually having this conversation, or I was having a conversation, I think, with a family member. And we started with something, and suddenly, like, we went something else. And I was just standing there being quiet and, like, trying to understand how it went from one point to another, or from, there was no point that they were trying to make. They wanted to just have a conversation. And it felt like the conversation was really just, the more the quieter I became, the more I wasn't actually like being responsive in the way they wanted. And so what happened, oh, now I remember who, but I'm not gonna say it. So what happened was they got aggressive and loud and upset, and it was completely far away from context. And it reminded me of basically how I handled emotions when it came to like, when people kind of like pointed at how I was working and what are the things that I was doing when it comes to work and how I could have done it better or differently or things like this. And it seems like there's kind of like a whole connection between me seeing that part of myself before I act in other people and trying to understand it, and then realizing that what I was actually talking to the family member, they exhibited it, but then them exhibiting it made me see how I actually exhibited these things and how I presented it. And then ultimately kind of like allowed me to like double reflect, or kind of like reflect from like, from a stance of how I made mistakes and what I looked like making mistakes. Or when I looked like avoiding an attempt of fixing these mistakes or just doing work that's actually worth doing. And so basically I mean the butter out of all of this is when you're arguing and you're kind of like being, I don't want to say loud, but obnoxious or in somebody's face, like, no, you should kind of like see the passage or the road of whatever it is, the context that started whatever conversation and how you got to become so emotional. Because like whatever it is, you become arguing on an aggressive note, most definitely or probably has nothing to do with the initial context. It is probably just an insecurity of yours, a point where you don't know have information and you don't know how to handle it yet or properly, or a point of embarrassment maybe. These are all basically a reflection of how I kind of like saw myself. And right now I'm actually seeing different emotions that come out of my own ignorance, basically. And what does ignorance mean to me? It could mean anything from I'm not ready for this because I'm ignorant on how to handle it, versus I don't want to accept it to be true because I'm ignorant to my own lack of ability to move forward, right? And so all of these are genuinely basically what, everything in between is a trigger. And anytime we see ourselves kind of like riled up emotionally. And we're probably the furthest from the context of why we kind of like drifted. Because it's a self-defense mechanism, right? When your emotions rise, it's either fight, flight, or like freeze mode. And I've seen people fight, I've seen people flee. I've been on all of them, and I've seen people freeze. Have I frozen before? Yes, definitely, definitely. There's a big difference between fighting, fleeing, and freezing. Because the fighting part is normally a rampaging part. The fleeing part is just kind of like, I'm done with this, I'm not interested. But the freezing kind of like makes you susceptible to anything. And in a way, it kind of like packages you and allows your emotions to just absorb whatever is happening in order for you to kind of like have it not happen again, I guess. Oof, that's some in-depth about how people kind of like get fucked up. I keep naturally I'm reflecting on myself, on or basically my experience. But okay, so just let me say it one more time. The loudest thing you are arguing is probably the furthest thing emotionally from your context. There probably was a trigger in between that once you go from like, hey, what's going on? This is what I'm thinking about, to no, I don't want to be feeling this way or something. It's a video and it made me think of fuck ton of stuff, man. A fuck ton of stuff. So, love you guys. It's a video.